Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Knockout Podcast, episode 65. Welcome back. This, as you will find out towards the end, could be one of our final episodes, or at least one of our final, more regular episodes. But we won't start on a down like that. We'll save such news for the end. We do have a comeback after a week's break, but quite frankly, Sean Strickland versus Uriah Hall, and that whole card did not offer up a whole lot of discussion points. So we thought we'd save ourselves for UFC 265 down in Houston, Texas. Lewis versus Gane, and we now have a new interim heavyweight champion. I'm not quite sure why, but that's a discussion for another day. As ever, I am joined by Jack. Jack, how are you doing, and what did you make of the fights on the weekend?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, and the fights were pretty good overall, I think. Let me have a look. Obviously the kind of like the main event and the interim title is a bit ridiculous. But outside of that, I thought there were some really fun fights, to be honest. So can't complain too much. Like, we'll get into them a bit more, but just like shout out at the top, Fiziev-Green, Yadong and Kenny and Aldo Munoz were all... for as short as it lasted, Luque Chiesa were all really fun fights. So no, I really enjoyed them, to be fair. And what about you?
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head. They were all some really fun fights, and I think ones that, as you say, this was a fight that perhaps probably lacked the star sort of crowning main event, or at least perhaps the major pull. But all of those fights, when you looked at them, when we looked at it a couple of weeks ago, you said that those sort of 4 or 5 fights that you mentioned were going to deliver. It was just that as a pay-per-view, it perhaps didn't have that sort of that final star pull that was going to really sort of cement it as a cracking pay-per-view. But we don't pay pay-per-view prices around here, so it doesn't really affect us too much. But we may as well start with that main event. Ciyrl Gane defeats Derek Lewis by a third round TKO to complete a remarkable rise up in the UFC. I mean, made his UFC debut in 2019, and within almost to the day, in fact, 10th of August 2019 and 7th of August 2021. So within 2 years, he's gone, what is that, 4, 5, 6, 7-0 from obscurity to, well, UFC interim heavyweight title status. And you can't say it wasn't deserved after that performance. I mean, it was a shutout to go. That was a pretty good one.
It was, yeah. I mean, obviously it is heavyweight, so that is in and of itself a bit of a caveat sometimes. And also it was Derek Lewis, who is the most heavyweight fighter that exists, really. And like, he is incredibly hit or miss. And at the weekend, as in his previous title fight against Daniel Cormier, I think the pressure, he's the type of fighter that kind of like pressure and big moments do kind of get to him. And Derek Lewis really just didn't have anything to offer. A bit like, he landed, I think, about 3 punches, and it was, obviously, like, credit to Gane for that, for limiting him to that, but also it was a pretty poor performance from Derek Lewis as well.
Yeah, no, I think the official total on the UFC website was 16. Not that makes it particularly better, especially when compared to the 98 of Ciyrl Gane. But yeah, I think Derek Lewis is a weird one in terms of that sort of pressure that you mentioned, and I think if you could have probably came up with a stylistic matchup that sort of worked against Derek Lewis anymore, I think Ciyrl Gane is about the worst you could have created. Some guy that's quick on his feet, efficient with his movement and with his punches and with his decision making. I think that's something that stood out to me. Precise, accurate with that jab. He really had it all going. And I think when he came into the UFC, I think a lot of us, well, I say a lot of us, there was a lot of hype around him anyway from what the commentators were saying. And I I think I've probably watched all of his fights since he's come in. I can't say I saw this rise coming as meteoric as it did and as quickly as it did, but I think efficient is just the word I would use. But I am still sort of, despite the fact he's got the title now, I still don't know how I feel about him, because I don't feel like I've learnt enough about him, enough that I should have learnt about him, given he's now got the belt. And maybe that's because he's just been so good at shutting out his opponents and getting these dominant wins, Derek Lewis, Volkov, Rosenstruik. But I don't feel like I know enough about Ciyrl Gane that I should do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's as if like we haven't really seen him face a stiff test, really. Like, so he hasn't been able to answer those questions because he hasn't had the opponents really to do it. Although they have been fairly good opponents he's faced, like Volkov, Rosenstruik, a few others that do offer threats.
Can't forget about Tanavosa, the fastest moving heavyweight since sliced bread.
True, but they are all decent stylistic matchups for Gane, and I think that's just in part because of how talented he is overall. That it's going to take a really good fighter with the right style to kind of be a test for him. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how he is going forward, and yeah, like how he kind of copes with kind of, I suppose Ngannou is the obvious next step, but also like I'd like to have seen him versus like a prime Stipe, which I don't really think we'd get anymore. I think the DC fights and the Ngannou fights have taken the last of Miocic's prime, really. So, but still, even now, I think that Stipe versus Gane would be an interesting fight and would tell us a bit more about Gane, because really there hasn't been anyone that's been able to get consistent offense going against Gane. So we haven't seen how he can react to that and how he kind of like can adapt his game in that sense. So a fighter that can do that could get going a bit against Gane would be nice to see. But no, I thought that I was impressed by Gane, or in previous fights I've been kind of frustrated with Gane for not kind of, similar to a Leon Edwards kind of, where he doesn't push his advantages where he's got them. He's like very happy to kind of coast and play it safe. But kind of as the final round of the Nate Diaz fight with Leon Edwards showed, is that sometimes playing it safe isn't safe. If you have so much of an advantage over an opponent, you should push that advantage and try and get them out of there, because ultimately that is going to keep you safe, not having to fight so much. And he did that here. He had a clear advantage, was landing pretty much at will, had got a read on anything that Derek Lewis was throwing back at him, and then got him out of there. So you can't fault him for that. And I'm impressed, and I'm glad that he's kind of like saw the need to do that. I think that was impressive for me, or a boost for him.
Yeah, certainly. I think that there was that killer instinct we saw in that third round, and I think there probably was never a doubt that was there, because he's an absolute giant of a man and a heavyweight fighter at the end of the day. But as you say, that there has been at points some reluctancy to let his hands go, and it was good to see that he knew that Lewis was ready to be taken out of there and was able and willing to do that. But yeah, it is, I think one final thing I'll say, well, not final thing, but at least one other thing on the sort of his lack of tough opposition, or at least lack of adversity that he's faced. It, we've always joked about Tanabosa, or whenever there's a UFC heavyweight that can sort of move quickly, and everyone suddenly thinks, Jesus, these guys are going to be a problem. And we've memed Bosa to death. At least I have memed Tanabosa to death. But it is when you do combine that sort of swiftness of feet, his ability to be constantly bouncing in that sort of karate style, doing that for sort of, seemingly being able to do that for 25 minutes, and being able to pick his punches and do that. It's amazing that that's presented so many difficulties, or amazing just how much difficulties that has presented. You would have thought by sort of the Rosenstruik fight that everyone would have sort of cottoned on to this is the Gane we're gonna have, and I don't think Volkov nor Lewis seemingly understood that or came up with an idea to counteract that. I mean, not that it's in any way technical and probably not advisable, because Gane would have probably pivoted and countered his head off. But I don't know at what point Derek Lewis, why didn't you think let's just bum rush this man? Just sort of Ngannou Rosenstruik-esque, and just be like, screw this, let's just get him to the fence. And I know there was at times, and I think Gane was good at getting out of there. But
there were, as you said, there were times where Lewis literally did just rush forward, even just to kind of grab Gane, and Gane did do a good job of kind of pivoting and kind of shucking him off and not eating anything, kind of as he did. But so I think that, and as you mentioned there, Gane, I'm changing it the way I say his name every single time I say it. Ciyrl does have genuinely very good stamina for a heavyweight. He can keep up a pretty decent pace for 5 rounds, which is not something that can be said about a lot of heavyweights. So that also in and of itself is impressive. It's it's him and Stipe essentially that can do that, and DC when he was there, although he did fade a little bit. A fairly rare attribute for a heavyweight, and he seems to have it. So it'll be interesting to see how he fares going forward. And I think one thing that makes kind of the Ngannou fight even more interesting is the fact that they were sparring partners in the past. And I think that Ngannou, because of his speed and power, does have a tendency really to shock people, just with his physical presence, which is why I think he can get the early finishes so often, because people are just not ready for him pretty much on a physical level. Whereas Gane's got the kind of time having sparred him, so that won't be as much of a shock, and he'll have a few reads. Ngannou's improved significantly since they were sparring partners, but Gane will have a few reads that he can kind of implement and build off. So I think that that's one thing that will make the Ngannou fight a lot more interesting, and we'll also get to see how Ngannou's improved as well. So I think it actually is probably the best fight that can be made at heavyweight right now, certainly.
Yeah, I don't know what the timeline is for that. There was an interesting interview with Eric Nixick, Ngannou's coach, that literally just came out this afternoon, which I was having a read of, and they were sort of seeming to say that that obviously Ciyrl Gane represents a difficult task, and they know they're going to have to work on being able to sort of pick him off as he's sort of bouncing in and out of range. But it was surprising to me and maybe it was recency bias or the fact that Gane had just come off this win to see Gane open up as favourite. I mean, I think those odds did level, and I think probably Gane is probably one of Ngannou's toughest tests. I think maybe retrospectively that sort of Stipe in that second fight perhaps wasn't the Stipe that certainly wasn't the beating Gane the first time, and wasn't the one that entered into that DC trilogy. But I don't know, maybe I'm being overly not negative, but just uncertain on Gane, and perhaps his lack of adversity is just a case of he is just that good. But I just have this feeling that Ngannou is not being overlooked, and not being forgotten. But I just think back to what on earth he did to Stipe, and I know that wasn't the same Stipe, but I just have this sort of feeling that sort of presence of Ngannou and the ability and the improvements he's made should comfortably make him favourite in this fight. But
yeah,
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm probably giving Ngannou too much credit and probably not giving Ciyrl Gane enough credit. But that's just at least how my early thoughts are sort of formulating on this fight.
Yeah. No, I think it is there, as you said, because there are still questions to a degree around Gane. It is difficult to know. I would kind of like, just from a not having thought about it too much currently perspective, would favour, I think, Ngannou, just because he's had the experience in there and we've seen him kind of like grow. And like he did look genuinely improved against Stipe. Like, even saying it wasn't the same Stipe, just on a technical level, irrespective kind of the opponent, Ngannou did look better. He was putting combinations together better. He was kind of not putting everything into all his shots. So he was, throwing jabs, stuff like that. And his takedown defense looked significantly improved and then punished Stipe for it. So genuine improvements from Ngannou. And I think that's a fairly scary prospect for anyone. So, yeah, I'd certainly favour Ngannou currently. And in terms of, like, I don't know if necessarily by the fans he's been overlooked, but certainly by the UFC, he's been massively disrespected, I would say. So, and in a sense, it seems like forgotten about or kind of cast aside by Dana White, who's essentially held a grudge against him since he lost to Stipe the first time, because Dana built him out to be all this and that, and then kind of looks a bit silly. And Dana's never recovered. His ego's never recovered from that, essentially.
Oh, you do surprise me.
Yeah, even those Ngannou's has.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, and obviously there's no timeline or announcement. But I mean, wouldn't be the weirdest thing the UFC's done if the interim champion and the champion didn't end up fighting next. But yep. You would assume that is the fight for probably looking like sort of early next year. I mean, Ciyrl Gane did fight quite recently against Volkov. That was only in June, but we'll see. And yeah, we'll see how our opinions change nearer to that one. But we'll work our way down the card, because as you alluded to, there's quite a few things to talk about. And we may as well start with Jose Aldo, Pedro Munoz. Jose Aldo winning 30-27 all round, continuing his... Isn't it a renaissance? I don't know what it is. He moves to his second win. His second sort of formal win, if you don't count the Marlon Moraes one, in the bantamweight division. I mean, what is happening here? The move down to bantamweight was a weird one in itself, because he'd spent all those years struggling at 145. He's only 34, but he feels like he's older than 34, and he's just a menace in a 3-round fight. I mean,
yeah, well,
put him against anyone in a 3-round fight, and he is going to cause you problems. It was just. Again, I'm pretty sure I used the phrase "clinic" to describe Gane's performance, and I'm pretty sure you could use pretty similar verbiage to describe this Aldo performance.
I mean, yeah, like it's Jose Aldo. Like, he is probably the most technically deep fighter that has really ever fought in MMA. Like, I can't think of one deeper in like an overall kind of like, or broader, kind of like a broad and deep skill set. So even at the age of 34, although it's not that old, he is 17 years into a nearly 40 fight career, with essentially a lot of fight miles on the clock. And I think he does look fit. Like, there's been a decent drop off, and you can see that, but due to his kind of technical depth, and that on a technical level, lots of like, the overall kind of like skill level hasn't caught up to him yet. He's still able to do absolutely incredible things this deep into his career, and it really is a joy to watch in that sense. And it speaks to his kind of like technical depth, that despite getting knocked out by McGregor in 13 seconds, however many years ago, Aldo seems to actually have longer longevity than McGregor has.
Yeah.
McGregor seems to have dropped off significantly. Aldo's still doing absolutely, like, he's still a top 5 fighter, you know, in arguably the best division in the sport, or the UFC. So yeah, it's truly fantastic. I thought he looked brilliant here, showing everyone that calf kicks can indeed be dealt with, that they aren't a undefendable menace, that actually, that if you've got the kind of like the acumen for it, they can be defended fairly simply, or as near as simply can be. That they don't have to be this kind of like terrifying technique that no one can deal with. So, and his performance really did kind of like center around that. It's, or as most Aldo performances do, it's like a kind of like defensive kind of like masterclass. Like, he just doesn't really get touched. You can't touch him and he will frustrate you. And I think that was shown quite clearly by all the kind of like ridiculous out of nowhere spinning kicks that Pedro Munoz tried to land. Like, I think purely out of frustration, because he kind of lacked the depth and nuance in his own game to try and like to get at Aldo with more conventional methods. So he just threw out some things that he just thought would Hail Marys, basically.
Yeah.
But no, it was brilliant from Aldo. I love this performance.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the defensive elements of that, and I think that certainly is true, especially when you talk about those low kicks. But it's also, as was mentioned on the broadcast, his highest punch output or landed, his most strikes landed in a UFC fight.
Yeah.
So not only sort of having that defensive solidity, but clearly piecing together his combos. He landed a wicked combo in the third round. He was going to the body, the leg kicks. You know, come on, Jose. We're, you know, third round they were getting there. Let's just have a few more earlier on, because third round he was basically chopping him down at will with the low kicks. But we just need a few more of them. But yeah, I mean, fantastic performance. He's just an evergreen fighter. Even as physically faded as I think he is, due to like kind of the skill level that he was operating at, and has, he's still able to be so good. And it's also interesting that his style has changed over the course of his career. Like, because he isn't the physical specimen that he once was, he's had to fight and slightly adjust his game to his kind of like new physicality. And like, obviously he's not throwing the low kicks generally as much these days. Like, I think is in part sort of an adaptation to deal kind of like with the lack of like being a little bit slower, even though he's still I think it is probably a
fast.
sort of defensive measure. He probably doesn't want to sort of leave himself out there as much. But yeah, sorry.
But yeah, like his style these days is like a lot more of a kind of combination body puncher, and like I think it's great to see. And he put together a lot of really nice combinations in this, and at points I think it was, in a way, they were effective at kind of scaring Munoz off. Like, I think towards the end, like in the third, I think he was tiring slightly, but I think that he kind of had shut down enough of Munoz's offense and established his own threats kind of with the combinations going forward, that it kind of like scared Munoz into passivity, because he really didn't do anything in the third, because it was like, I can't do anything to this guy, and if I try and get in range, he kind of explodes forward with a 4-punch combination, rips my body apart, and like, what can I do? So yeah, just brilliant, and I love Jose Aldo, so I'll always enjoy watching his fights until he completely falls off.
and long may it continue. I mean,
oh yeah,
the bantamweight the bantamweight division rather, is an interesting one at the minute. I think they've just had Aldo, Yan, 2 confirmed for the next. I was about to say pay-per-view, but it's not a pay-per-view. The next sort of numbered event, if that's what you want to call it, UFC 266, which I think is in Abu Dhabi, and I think has got, is it Glover versus Jan Blachowicz main headlining? I mean, that's by the by, but you would imagine it's TJ would get the next shot. Rob Font. I mean, it depends whether TJ wants another fight. He's talked about wanting another fight. If he wants another fight, I mean, I'm ready to see a TJ Aldo fight.
As long as it's 3 rounds, I don't need it.
That's the thing. We don't need. We just need just keep it on a pay-per-view and keep him in that co-main slot.
Yeah.
and then have some weird stipulation when he gets another title shot that Jan sort of has only got. Actually, no, to be fair, because I do want Jan to keep winning. But
comes into conflict with the Jan love. No, I think I don't know if Aldo's going to go and get a title shot or whatever. And I don't necessarily need to see him fight for a title again. But there are still great fights out there for him. Like him against, as you said, TJ is a fairly obvious one that could be made. But him against Sandhagen is a fantastic fight. Rob Font, and a classic one that we never got to see, him versus Dominic Cruz. If Dom wants to come back. That's always. And I think that keep all those fights to 3 rounds, and you will get just more fantastic performance to the end of one of the best careers of all time. So just brilliant, really.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know where Aldo's head is at. Probably him as a competitor is still someone who probably wants to go for the belt, and I'm not sure a TJ fight is that one. Not sorry, a TJ one. A Dominic Cruz one is that one, but I mean that seems like a cracking little fight if they can make it. But as we said, any
just
number
for the kind of nostalgia, more than
but any number of those fights that we mentioned are great ones, as long as they are 3 rounds. But yeah, I mean, great for him. Pedro Munoz, I think we all know sort of Pedro Munoz's level, and he is that sort of sort of 5 to 10 guy, and there are plenty of fights out there for him, and he will always be a guy that gets a good fight out of anyone, really. He's always a fun fighter. Vincente Luque, Michael Chiesa, Vincente Luque, get him a title shot. I mean, to fair to you, Jack, I wasn't quite there before you. You've been banging the metaphorical Luque drum since before drums were even a thing. I mean, I'm trying to think back to when it was. I mean, maybe sort of Mike Perry days, Brian Barberina. I mean, I remember sort of talking about them. But yeah, it is amazing to see sort of Luque, who I sort of sometimes thought was going to get stuck as this sort of swinger and slobber knocker guy that would sort of win a couple, face a good guy, lose, win a couple, go up again, and he did that with Thompson, but he's gone up and he's got a win against Woodley that it's a good name. He was the last one to get the Woodley name. But now he's gone and beaten Michael Chiesa, who was I think 5 or 6 in the rankings, and he is now undeniably a title contender.
He is, I did. He even as much as I love Vincente Luque, he's one of my favorite fighters. He's fantastic. He's and it's interesting. If you look at fans, there are obviously fans are very split on certain fighters. But Vincente, I've never really seen a fighter as almost universally loved by kind of dedicated fans as Vincente Luque. No one has a bad word to say about him because he's just pure fun and he's really good. But yeah, I'm disappointed that he never got he could never climb the rankings when Woodley was champion, because I think even he would have been a really rough fight even for kind of champion Woodley. But yeah, no, I thought it was a really fun fight, obviously, for as long as it lasted. Chiesa came out and kind of did a decent job kind of staying on the outside and kind of like jabbing him from distance. Luque was trying to close him down, like taking his time about it a little bit, didn't really get going on the feet before Chiesa kind of like burst into the takedown. And Luque is like not an amazing defensive wrestler. He's decent. But he doesn't need to be, because from the front left headlock, he's one of the best in MMA from the front headlock. And like we've seen that time and time again. We saw it here, submitting Michael Chiesa, who is himself a very strong grappler, although has been vulnerable to submissions every now and again. But yeah, that is Luque's move, and Chiesa kind of fell right into it.
Yeah, it was a weird one. He bizarrely, in that fight, I think it's not untrue to say that Chiesa outstruck Luque with that sort of rogue 1-2 that he managed to sneak in through the pipeline. Got the takedown, but Chiesa again, and they said it on commentary quite well after the submission. He hasn't quite found, and certainly didn't in this fight, find that balance between sort of advancing position and sort of taking risks and sort of, consolidating and, exerting damage and, ensuring sort of safety first. That there were times in that fight before that loss where he comfortably had the back and could have, taken that in, landed a few shots, reassessed, composed himself, and then gone again for another attempt. But his sort of willingness to chase the submission left him just too open. And as you said, Luque's a clinical guy like that, and got some hell of a choke in, because he didn't have any control of the body or anything, but locked it in, and it was good night from there.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, like Luque's kind of like game on the ground does really revolve kind of around that, and he can hit it from a variety of different kind of positions. But when he's got it locked in, it is wicked tight. Like the finish on it, the squeeze was brilliant. So yeah, just a fun performance from a fun fighter that's essentially always guaranteed fun. So yeah, definitely. I'd like to see him fight Usman, because I think he's basically the only one, the top 5 now, that Usman hasn't fought. Kind of, I think that's true.
Yeah, I think so.
So I don't know. I'd be happy to get that done. I'd think it'd be more fun than a second the Covington fight was fun enough, but I think the second time round, I think that Usman will be considerably better for Covington than Covington. So I'd prefer a Luque fight at this point, but get it booked after. I
wonder whether he needs one more win. Not that I'd have no qualms giving it to him before or after a Covington fight. I'd love to see a Burns fight. I'd love to see an Edwards fight. A Masvidal fight would be great for him as well. I mean, even from a sort of name recognition point of view. But yeah, I think he is no more than one more win away from a title shot, which I'm not sure I ever quite believed we could get to.
Yeah,
Tecia Torres, Angela Hill. A shame. We've always been a big fan of Angela Hill, and I think in her sort of few fights before this, the Michelle Waterson fight, was it Claudia Gadelia? She had a close fight win. She's always been someone who was who could get to those who I always thought could get to that next level, in terms of she always beat the people below her, but she always struggled at those people above her. And this was the first time that she looked sort of out of her depth against someone in that sort of upper bracket. I don't know how you saw the fight, but that was a sort of takeaway I had, at least. Yeah,
I think that she did really kind of struggle to get going, really. Like Torres was doing a good job, kind of like with the side kick of like keeping her at bay and kind of punishing her from range, despite being considerably shorter. And she couldn't get kind of like her usual sort of clinch game going where she normally has such a big advantage. So yeah, it was a bit of a disappointing performance from like probably my favourite women's MMA fighter. And we are big fans of Angela Hill on this podcast, so it was disappointing. But like, I think at this point I've kind of accepted that I don't think Angela Hill's going to be like a championship level fighter now. I think that I'm happy to see her kind of just in fun fights because she is generally guaranteed action. So yeah, like not going to be kind of like upper echelon, but she will always be good fun.
Yeah, and in that strawweight division, unlike other divisions above, there is a sort of depth of talent that should certainly provide her as a I don't want to say gatekeeper, but certainly someone that can have sort of great fights around the sort of fringes of the rankings, sort of mid to low rankings, and if young prospects do sort of want to come up, but I think a great test will always be in the form of Angela Hill. A couple more fights too. Actually, one thing I will say, because I won't give it a full mention, but whilst we're on the topic of the women's fights, shout out to Karolina Kowalkiewicz for perhaps the worst decision I've ever seen. Sort of voluntarily just sort of lying in Jessica Pene's guard, knowing she had the striking advantage. I mean, they sort of have like an NFL or like in any sport, they have sort of play of the day. That was the complete opposite. It was like when Hannah Siffers just walked into Mackenzie Dern's guard. It's like, what
do you do?
will people just learn that you can just let them stand up, or just do that sort of weird thing where you sort of like kick their flailing legs? They're sort of like lying on their back. Just awful decision making. But enough of that. Let's move back to the main card. Song Yudong, Casey Kenny, split decision victory for Song Yudong. Just a really fun fight. Song Yudong had been on a bit of a bad streak. He had lost to Kyler Phillips I say a bad streak. Actually, that was Kyler Phillips was his loss, but I sort of had in my mind he lost to Marlon Vera. But
I think it was a fairly decently controversial fight, although I can't fully remember who I scored it for at the time, but I remember it being quite controversial.
But this one certainly was a fun one.
Yeah, it certainly was. I think that Yudong is really a top tier athlete. He's very fast and powerful. And I think that if he can continue to kind of like make improvements, I think that he can kind of be a threat going forward. But Casey Kenny is a stiff test for most people. And I thought it was a pretty good fight, to be honest. Really fun.
Yeah, no.
Although,
sorry.
It's one of those that like sometimes like you can't fully remember the specifics of what happened. You just kind of like in the moment enjoyed it, but looking back, it was like, oh yeah, what went on there?
Yeah, I remember sort of like short, sharp exchanges, but nothing sort of monumental came out. But I think I thought from Kenny, there was a bit of a tendency to sort of rush and he had struggled sort of getting his range. He would often sort of throw first, but sort of throw out of range, and then by the time he was in range, he'd thrown, and Song Yudong would sort of pepper him back. So yeah, a good win for Song Yudong, a good fight. I don't think either man comes out of that with a sort of a loss of sort of reputation. They're both good guys at that sort of lower end of that bantamweight division, which we've already talked about, is incredibly stacked, and they're both also crucially very young, and I'm sure we'll go on to both climb the metaphorical ladder. The last one to talk about then, I guess, really, the fight of the night, one that we earmarked a couple of weeks ago. We might not have done it on the podcast, but we certainly did it talking to each other. Rafael Vasiev, however you want to say it, defeating Bobby Green. 30-27, not quite sure, but 29-28,
30-27 is a very bad scorecard.
Well, I mean, we can come to that maybe. I mean, we may as well do it now, I guess, whilst in the overall discussion. When I heard the 30-27, I thought, hey, Bobby Green's won this. Because I thought there was just no way. I mean, interestingly, the I was about to say umpire, the ref, well, not the ref, the scorer,
judge,
the judge. That's the one. I've been doing a 65 episode podcast. I should know the names of these by now. I think his name's JJ Ferraro, and he actually put out a sort of one of those sort of notes, Twitter explanations, sort of explaining his decision, which essentially boiled down to. He says that the effective striking is split into two. Well, I mean, he sort of explained the effective striking rather, which obviously says that strikes that could potentially lead to the fight ending should be judged better than strikes that are sort of there for sort of cumulative damage. Essentially, this sort of quality versus quantity, which I get, and yes, that is how the sort of unified rules are. But at what point does just a sheer amount of quantity, which we saw from Bobby Green, just exceed any sort of, smaller amount of quality potential fight-ending strikes? Which also I don't think there were in that third round.
Yeah, like from in that third round, like the fight ending, the harder strike, more and harder strikes were coming from Bobby Green. Yeah. Like, I don't understand how you can score that third round for Fiziev. Bobby Green landed frequently on him, and he landed very hard. Like, at that point, it's like, I don't know, kind of ridiculous judging. And yeah, I thought 29-28 for Fiziev is a fine scorecard. I think that I'd have to actually rewatch to know, because I think the first round was pretty close. And if you gave the first round to Bobby Green, that would also be a okay scorecard as well. But kind of either way, it was a really fun fight. I think Fiziev really did slow down, and we saw that kind of markedly in a way that we haven't seen him before. So that's interesting that kind of like we got to see that. But even so, like, he was having trouble landing the big shots on Green. But what I like about Fiziev is that a lot of kind of more underdeveloped fighters, say at heavyweight, like Derek Lewis, for example. Let's compare him to Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis is always looking for the big one knockout shot. In a way that Fiziev, to an extent, kind of is looking for that as well. He is looking for kind of like the big finish. But in the meantime, when he's struggling to land that against someone who is very defensively sound or tricky defensively, like Bobby Green, he will just be kind of like chipping away and adding up kind of like attritive damage, whereas like Derek Lewis has no attritive weapons.
Yeah, definitely no.
He can't accumulate damage in it.
Yeah, he's happy to do that sort of work. I think you put it perfectly. In those weird, because I thought if ever there was a fighter that was going to be sort of willing, well, not willing, but open to a head kick, it'd be a guy that sort of keeps his fist down by sort of shoelaces in Bobby Green. But yeah, his sort of unconventional defense did make it difficult. But as you say, Fiziev quickly said, okay, the head kick's not there. Maybe I'd have liked to see him sort of try and get back to it more than he did, but he was happy just to say, well, I'm just going to smash your legs and your bodies to pieces then.
Yeah, I think that it's also interesting. Fiziev is a very tech. I think we might have discussed this briefly. I think when Holloway and Yair Rodriguez was announced, in the on a kind of like mechanical or kind of technical level, Yair Rodriguez is clearly is a better kicker than Max Holloway. But when you actually kind of like in the context of MMA, I say Max Holloway is a better kicker than Yair Rodriguez because he sets it up better and he can work it into his game more effectively. Even though the actual kicks themselves aren't as good, Holloway's a better kicker. And for Fiziev, he's a very good kicker, very fast, very powerful kicker. But isn't amazing or isn't the best at setting them up and kind of like bringing them into his game. And a lot of people can see like the high kicks coming, which is why like I think like struggles to land them on Green, but he has like struggled to land them kind of on other opponents as well. So it's mostly when he goes to the legs that he is best with his kicks, because although he's very powerful, he isn't the best at setting them up. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of like an interesting kind of like we're learning more about Fiziev essentially.
Yeah, and I think also as much as no, I think you're definitely right to say that, and I think that is 100% true. As much as we're learning stuff about him, I think he's learning stuff about himself and his game plan. I think this is the kind of opponent that he needed, a guy that is difficult, awkward, unconventional, and as we saw in that third round, present some sort of some offensive problems of himself, and that's a good test for him, and obviously he's a really good fighter and will go on to do great things, but there are good questions that Bobby Green has posed that him and his team will have to go back and sort of work at, and how better can they set traps, pacing himself in the fight or just increasing that stamina. But yeah, I mean, still an incredibly promising fighter, a great fight, and for Bobby Green, I mean, great to see him just still being involved in these fights. He put on a great performance, and was slightly unlucky with those scorecards, because I could certainly see, as you say, a scenario whereby there could have been a sort of split decision. I think ultimately, I think more people scored that first round for Fiziev, or would have done at least, and rightly so. But Bobby Green certainly did not make a bad account of himself, and will certainly still has a great sort of role to play in the sort of lower echelon or lower sort of depths of the lightweight division. I mean, was there anything else you wanted to mention on this card?
Nothing in particular. Manel Cape got a pretty nice
finally
knockout.
off the mark.
Off the mark, yeah. Although he did miss weights. Who knows if he's going to go up to bantamweight or what he's going to do, but nice to see him finally finding his feet, kind of. I thought the Nicolau fight, he was a bit unfortunate. I seem to remember I thought he won. But what are you going to do? I hope he can continue to improve, because he was fairly promising when he came into the UFC, so we'll see.
Yeah, we certainly will. Okay, well, with that being said, I guess that's time to draw it to a close. As I said at the start, there was some sort of announcement, that being that, we basically can't continue to do it just as frequently as we want to. Obviously, we've both been sort of living in the luxuries of university life. Well, Jack not for the last year, but me certainly so. And with jobs and different timetables, it's going to be difficult for us to find the time to do it, at least on a sort of weekly basis. Whether we can do it on a sort of monthly basis for sort of the big pay-per-view events or cards that take our fancy, I think we're still going to want to do that. But yeah, in terms of being able to produce a sort of weekly podcast, obviously we've not been able to do that as much over the summer, and sort of moving into sort of September time. We probably won't. So this will be the last one, maybe for maybe a month or so, maybe longer than that. We'll have to see how it all develops, but hopefully we'll be still able to cover stuff in the future, and just come back on and vent about the state of the UFC heavyweight division or the women's flyweight division, or
always
that I don't know, Amanda Nunes has still not defended her belt in 2 years, which is a bit bonkers. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff to vent on questionable political views of UFC fighters, which I feel like we haven't done enough recently. I always look back to that time where that bloody elbow article came out that sort of helpfully listed all the sort of anti-vaxxer, sort of anti-Semitic views that everyone held. That was always a great time.
Good time.
That made you feel really positive about the sport you follow. But yeah, no, thank you for sort of listening, everyone, for all these times, whether you've listened to one or, I mean, hopefully not 65. I hope you've not put yourself through that. But yeah, we'll be back, I'm sure, but it might not be for it might not be as frequently or as soon as well either of us would like, really. But that's just the way it is. Unless you know, Dana White wants to bring us in, you know, I'll happily shill a couple of pay-per-views. You know, I think
if he were to listen to any of the kind of, if you were to listen to the back catalogue, I think I don't know how long, how good that offer might be.
I'll put it beside it. You know, no, it's behind you now. It's behind you. But yeah, sort of, you know, jokes aside, we will back at some point, but not in the sort of near future at least. But until then, stay safe, everyone. Have a nice, and we'll see you then.
Yep, it's been fun. See ya.